Hey guys, and welcome back to Morgs Menu. So today I'm going to be showing you how to make risotto. Now risotto is one of those things that sounds really scary to try and do. Sounds like something you only eat at restaurants and you don't ever try and worry about doing for yourself. However, it's really not that difficult, and I wanted to show you an easy recipe that I found and how I kind of taught myself how to do it, some tips and tricks to make it easier for you. It's really not that difficult. As long as you keep the other ingredients pretty simple, you just have some patience with cooking and set aside the time to fully do the cooking process. It's really not that difficult. Now this specific recipe today is going to be using red wine and goat cheese with caramelized onions and mushrooms. It's really good, but this will kind of just basically show you how to make risotto in general so you can switch up any of those flavors that you want. So let's go ahead and go over the ingredients for today's recipes and get started. So overall, the ingredients for this recipe is pretty straightforward and pretty simple. As you can see, we don't have too much going on here. So the first thing we'll take a look at is the rice that we're going to use. So this is Arborio rice. This is what we're going to use for the risotto. Now I know it looks like there's not a lot in there, but it is enough for 2 servings, and this is a very filling meal, and we're going to be using lots of veggies to kind of supplement, so it's going to be enough for 2 people and 2 servings. Then of course we'll need some olive oil as well as some butter for the cooking process. You're also going to want some sort of broth or stock. I personally like stock for this because it brings a good flavor. The original recipe actually calls for chicken stock, but I personally have found that I like, when with the red wine, I like using beef stock, but of course if you are vegetarian you can switch this to vegetable stock, and this entire recipe would then be vegetarian. Of course, the spices, we're going to of course need some nice salt and pepper, minced garlic, as well as some basil. You can use fresh basil if you have it, but I don't, and we're just going to use this. It still gives that great flavor. And then as I mentioned, we're going to be caramelizing some mushrooms and onions, so I have those pre-sliced and washed here. And then we just need some goat cheese as well. So now that you know what you need, let's go ahead and get started on the cooking process. Alrighty, so first thing we're going to want to do is just go ahead and prep up the vegetables. Now you can do one of 2 things. If you want to kind of speed up the overall cooking process, you can have 2 pans going, one cooking the mushrooms and onions and getting those caramelized, and the other cooking the risotto. But to keep things simple and to not try and multitask too many things at one time, we're just going to be using the one pan here. So first thing we're going to do is just go ahead and get those onions and mushrooms caramelized. So to do that, all you want to need is a nice saute pan, and go ahead and turn your stove to medium heat. You're also going to want to add in some olive oil as well as some butter. Because we're only doing 2 servings, you're only going to need about half a tablespoon of each. Now you just want to wait till your pan gets completely hot, the butter is completely melted, and then we'll throw the veggies in. Alright, so now our pan is nice and hot, the butter has completely melted and has started bubbling, so we can go ahead and start with the veggies. So first thing we're going to do is just throw in the sliced onions directly in there. Let those go ahead and saute for about 2 minutes, and then we'll throw in the mushrooms. Basically, you just wait until these have gotten caramelized. It's going to take somewhere between 10 to 15 minutes, depending on how much you have in your pan, how big your pan is, all that kind of stuff. So just wait about 10 to 15 minutes. Stir them occasionally, making sure nothing's stuck on the bottom and burning. But this is really the easy part. All you have to do is just make sure they get nice and brown. And I'll show you at the end what they should look like. So the mushrooms and onions are nice and caramelized here. They've gotten nice and brown. You could leave them on for a couple more minutes if you wanted to, but I personally like them kind of once they've gotten to this point. So now we're just going to take these off the pan and set them in a bowl on the side, and we'll add them back in at the end. Alrighty, so now it's time to go ahead and cook up the risotto. Now traditionally risotto is done just kind of in a normal pot like you would cook pasta or normal rice. However, I've found that it's easy to really keep it consistent and to cook it a lot easier for myself in a saucepan like this. So we're just going to start cooking the risotto directly in this pan. You can do it either way, but I've just found this helps keep everything cooked nice and evenly. It helps me be able to watch the cooking process easier. So I just like to do it in the same pan that I've sauteed my mushrooms and onions in. So now all we want to do is again add about half a tablespoon to a tablespoon of butter and oil into our pan at medium heat. And because our pan was already hot from before, it's not going to take long for this butter and oil to melt and for everything to be nice and hot. Now you may notice this is sizzling really loudly, and that's partially because we do use lactose-free or dairy-free butter, and that tends to sizzle and kind of get hotter at a lower temperature. So I just find that that makes a lot more noise than regular butter. So if your pan isn't that loud, don't worry, nothing's wrong with it. That's just the kind of butter that I'm using. So once your pan has kind of died down and isn't, splattering or anything like that anymore, and you've kind of stirred to combine the butter and the oil together, now we're just going to go ahead and add our minced garlic into here. So you just want a couple of cloves of garlic. It's kind of a personal preference. I personally like a lot of garlic, so I'm going to use maybe a small tablespoon, maybe half a tablespoon of garlic for this. You just want to add it to your oil only for about 30 seconds until it gets fragrant. You don't want to leave it in there for too long because garlic will burn very, very easily and very quickly, especially when it's already minced. So just be careful not to burn it. Alrighty, and once it starts getting brown and you can tell it's getting nice and fragrant, we're going to go ahead and add in our rice directly into the mixture. Now again, I didn't need to measure it because I know this is 2. It's starting to seem like this is a little bit too hot, so I'm going to go ahead and pull it off the heat. If you start seeing some of the garlic getting browned, I'm going to go ahead and pull it off the heat to make sure you're not burning it. Most of what you're seeing here, though, if you can see some of the burnt bits, is just kind of the bottom that has come off from the caramelizing the mushrooms and onions. Alrighty, so we pulled off our pan a little bit, and now we're just going to stir to cover the rice in the oil, butter, and garlic. Now you want to take your spoon and just kind of spread out the rice kind of evenly along the bottom of the pan, just so that it sautés. And you're just going to saute this for about 2 or 3 minutes, just strictly with the butter and oil, so it starts to get a little bit browned. Alrighty, so now that it's sauteed for just about 2 minutes, it's getting nice and brown. So now we're going to go ahead and add in our wine. Now the wine is kind of the first step. If you want to exclude that, you can just start strictly with the broth or stock that you're going to be using in the recipe. So because we're just doing 2 servings, you're going to add about half of the liquid that you're using at a time to cook the risotto. So what I'm going to do is pour myself a little bit of this wine here. This is just a Cabernet, but you can really use any type of red wine. You don't want to get anything that's too sweet, but most red wines will work just fine. So now we're going to add half a cup of our red wine into this measuring cup here, and then just add this directly into the pan. It's going to sizzle a lot. So as you can see, I just slowly added the wine directly in there. Because of the alcohol contact, it does really get loud when you first throw it into the pan. But don't be alarmed, just kind of slowly pour it in there and it'll all turn out all right. So now, just with all the other steps that we're going to do with risotto, you're going to want to just kind of frequently stir this and wait for the rice to completely soak up the liquid that you have. So you want to do it in steps. You don't want to throw in your wine and your broth or your stock all at one time. To really get that nice risotto texture, you want to do this in steps, which is why it tends to take some patience and take a little bit longer. So basically every 30 seconds to a minute, you kind of want to just stir this around. Now because we're only doing half a cup at a time and we're only doing 2 servings of the rice, it's probably only going to take 5 to 10 minutes for this rice to fully soak up the liquid. If you're doing 4 or 5 servings, it could take up to 15 minutes, but just be patient, keep an eye on it. Try not to multitask too much with this recipe. You're going to want to stay pretty close to this because you don't want to have all of the risotto that's at the bottom of your pan soak up everything and start to burn. So you want to make sure you're stirring this basically every minute if you can. Now you're going to want to watch the temperature of your pan as well when you do this. As you can see, mine's really at almost a high boil now. So I'm going to just turn the pan down to a little bit below medium. I think this pan gets a little bit hot as I cook more on it, so I just want to make sure I'm not overcooking. You want it to be kind of at a low boil, not at a really high functioning boil. So just turn it down if you ever see that your pan's getting to that. Alrighty, so as you can see, it's almost fully absorbed the liquid already. So I'm just going to give it another minute or so, and then we'll start adding in half cups of stock at a time. You can do this, typically it takes me about 3 times till it gets the texture that I like. You can really do it anywhere from 2 to 5 times, just depending on what you want. I've really found that it's just important to taste test throughout this process to make sure that the rice is the texture that you personally like it and how you want your risotto to be. So as you can see, the liquid's basically all soaked up from the bottom of the pan, so we're going to go ahead and add in our stock. So same amount as we did for the wine, another half cup. And then just slowly add it in. As you can tell, it's not going to make nearly the noise that the wine does. Now that the stock's in, again, we're just going to wait about 4 or 5 minutes until the rice has completely soaked it all up. Alrighty, so our first round of stock is basically completely absorbed by the rice now. So again, we're going to add in another half cup of the stock directly into the pan. Now just for reference, when I have made about 4 servings of this, I did a cup at a time. So really depending on the amount of servings you have, you want to do about a 1/4 cup of liquid at a time per serving. So I'm doing half a cup for 2, and you do a full cup for 4. Now, if you're doing up to like 8 servings, you may want to test it and see what works. You don't want to do too much liquid all at once, even if you do have a bunch of servings. So you may just have to do multiple rounds of 1 cups for that. But you should be able to tell the overall rice is going to be just covered by the amount of liquid, especially if you do it in a sauté pan. And you'll be able to tell based on how it absorbs. If you find that it's taking a really long time, then maybe decrease the amount of liquid that you're putting in at a time. So now we're just going to keep doing what we're doing, stir this every minute or so, and wait for this to fully absorb the liquid. And we'll go ahead and do a taste test after this to see if it's ready to go or if we need to do another round. Alrighty, so the liquid from the second round of stock has basically completely come out. So I'm going to go ahead and test it to see if it's at the texture that we want or if we need to do another round. I personally think it needs to go another round just so it's nice and soft. You'll be able to tell it's going to have very similar texture to just normal everyday rice. It's just thicker and it has more liquid in it. So if you like kind of a chewier rice, you can of course leave it at this. Just kind of taste test it based on what you would want it to be. But I'm going to go ahead and add in another half a cup, and then I'll be ready to add in the rest of the ingredients. Alrighty, so with that additional half cup of stock, the risotto has gotten to a nice texture. It's nice and kind of almost like a soft chewiness. It'll make sense when you're doing it. It's really good, and that's the texture I really want for this kind of creamy recipe. So now basically I have gone ahead and turned off the heat on my burner, and we're just going to go ahead and mix in the remaining ingredients. So we'll start by adding in our mushrooms and onions. Also going to add in our goat cheese. So for this, I find that if you do more than about an ounce of goat cheese per serving that you're doing, it's too overpowering. So we're going to do about 2 ounces of goat cheese. We'll go ahead and mix that together so that the goat cheese melts in with the risotto and the mushrooms and onions. Now you'll notice I'm leaving it on the burner that was hot. I like to do that to make sure that everything stays nice and warm and the goat cheese will melt easier. But I do want to turn off the heat because you want to prevent any continual cooking from the risotto. Alrighty, so now that we have everything incorporated together, we'll just add in the remaining spices. So that'll just be some dried basil and a little bit of salt and pepper. Alright, and now it's time to plate. Alrighty, so here it is all plated up. Now obviously, because of the ingredients we used, it's kind of just a brown meal. It would be a lot prettier if we had some nice fresh basil to throw on top to bring some green to the dish, but based on what's going on right now, fresh basil is not a staple in my refrigerator, so we just have this. I just topped it with a little additional goat cheese. It's not the prettiest looking meal, but I promise it is delicious. If you have any questions on anything I did on the recipe, feel free to leave those in comments down below. Like I said, you can use this specific recipe based on what I used, but you can also just use kind of the steps that I showed you on how to make risotto for whatever flavors you want to combine, whether that's maybe a Parmesan risotto or something like that. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. If you're new here and haven't yet subscribed, make sure you go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the videos that I post on Wednesdays and Sundays. Thanks again for watching Morgs Menu, and I hope you have a great day. Bye guys.